a lot of politics to get onto, but first of all, the escalating kind of scandal I think it's going to end up being around Mohammed Al Fayed. Now over 100 victims have come forward, investigations not just into Al Fayed, but associates around him who were involved in not just covering up, but maybe enabling. And also a question about whether or not there were kind of police corruption issues as well. This is getting serious.
I think it's very serious. I think the problem is that a lot of these very powerful people, I think Jimmy Savile was an example, are somehow shielded when they're alive from any further investigations. And I think it's a shame that it's only when they're dead, in a way, that all of this comes out. So in the interest of justice, it's not very satisfying to have all of these appalling allegations come out after, beyond the point where we can do anything to bring them to book.
I mean, that's absolutely right, isn't it? I mean, shocking, atrocious allegations has to be investigated properly. But I think viewers watching this morning will be thinking, why does this keep happening again and again? Why is there clearly failure from institutions, including, it sounds like, the police, who are supposed to protect victims and investigate properly? It sounds like there was huge failures there, so we've really got to get into the bottom of all of this.
Yeah, and it always highlights, doesn't it, that quite often these people are not lone actors. We saw it with Jeffrey Epstein, you see it with others, that they are, they have a ring of people around them.
Accomplices.
Yeah, absolutely.
People who are facilitating
Yeah, and it raises the question in my mind, apart from facilitating, but just being aware, not reporting abuse where you may suspect it isn't a crime. It's a moral duty. We expect people to do it. But there was a suggestion, I think, in the Criminal Justice Bill earlier this year that there should be a crime in and of itself, a failure to report it.
I think that makes sense, because clearly it's repeated behaviour now. We saw it with Jimmy Savile, now Mohammed Al Fayed. There have been others. I think the Church of England man, I think he was called John Smithson.
Yeah, and you saw Justin Welby resigning over not being vigorous enough in pursuing.
But again, they'd all committed these horrible crimes. They passed away at an advanced age in all of those cases. And it was only after they had gone, they were dead, that all of this came out. And I think that's not satisfactory.
No, well, we'll see where this escalating inquiry goes, because, as you say, it's widening all the time. Shall we talk about the assisted dying bill and the vote? It is fast upon those MPs. It's a question of conscience. And it's interesting, isn't it, that David Cameron now has said overnight that he has changed his mind. And I suppose that's where this knife-edge vote is going to be balanced on. Are people still in a position where they are changing their minds, Jonathan?
Oh, I mean, absolutely.
Well, of course, Jonathan doesn't have to vote now.
I don't have to vote,
Cameron. Neither do I.
But did you vote the first time round?
Yes,
was it 2015? I think.
I'm pretty sure I abstained. I didn't. I was conflicted.
Now, Esther Ranson would call you up on that and say, because she has said you must vote. It is your obligation to vote.
But sometimes, I mean, funnily enough, you think we've got opinions on everything, and we generally do. But sometimes there are issues where it's very difficult.
Do you know how you'd vote if you were in the House of Commons?
I think now, rather like David Cameron, I would probably vote in favour. But I certainly wasn't in favour the first time round when it came in 2015.
What's changed your mind?
I think the safeguards around the bill, because the worry, obviously, is that if you do allow a bill like this, I think Boris made that point, it's very difficult to see, how you can draw the line. You could end up in a situation where people are essentially being bumped off, killed.
I still find these safeguards very unconvincing.
But I've come round to the view that I think this. You don't think that.
If I was voting in the House of Commons on Friday, I would vote against. But I'm not against it in principle. I've had no principal ethical objection. But I don't think at the moment we know how this will work. And I think having a bill which has not been really deeply scrutinised, and including by the government, is a problem.
Yeah, I'm with you, Ed. If I was still an MP, I'd be voting against it tomorrow, and I would actually...
On ethical grounds,
No, I'm not making a sort of moral point.
Same as me.
In that respect. Look, I mean, I obviously cannot even begin to imagine the unbearable pain and suffering
that's the issue I have.
Going through.
That's the issue I have.
Their life. However, but I am really, really worried about the safeguards. I'm really, really worried that this bill if it comes into law, will subtly change societal norms about this, and people will feel under pressure that their time is up.
Maybe.
That they are a burden. I certainly know from my time both as a shadow health secretary and a shadow welfare secretary, there are a lot of people who advocate on behalf of disabled people and the rights of disabled people are very concerned about that aspect of the debate as well, where people will be made to feel, they will fear they will be made to feel
but, you know,
that they are a burden.
Two-thirds of the British public are in favour of this. And so it is a question of whether MPs...
No, but it's a job of Parliament not just to work out whether it's a good idea, but whether, in fact, this bill will deal with every case in a way which is acceptable and provides proper protection.
But no bill will be able to deal with every case in the way that you want.
Every case as far as you can. The thing I feel, see what you think about this, I think this has gone as far as it can as a private member's bill.
Sure.
I think it's a huge problem being in a position where the Health Secretary and the Justice Secretary of the government are against it, but there is no proper input from those departments. I think the best outcome, personally, because I think it will be a huge blow to the campaign and people who really want this. I know many people do, and I would like to see it, if the bill falls in Parliament because there isn't enough support. And that is now the most likely outcome. What I think the government should do is ask him to withdraw the bill. The government sets up a quick process, a review, and the government says they will come back with legislation in the spring. Because I think unless the government leads this now, it's not going to get in the statute book.
It's quite vulnerable. I mean, that was my initial thought, because it's a procedural thing in the House, but the private members' bill's on the Friday. There's not actually that much time to debate.
Sort of 5 hours
unless the government gives it time.
That's right. And so, you know, I've done this as a backbencher. You can talk it out. I mean, all it takes is for one or two people, if they're so minded.
Well, I mean, there will be a vote tomorrow.
You think so?
There definitely will be a vote. My sense is it will probably go through narrowly. That's my sense at the moment.
And just to be clear for viewers, because not everybody's aware of Parliament.
No, sure, it's a parliamentary...
So just to be clear, that this is a second reading, isn't it? And so if it gets its second reading, then it would go to a
committee stage,
which is where... And that essentially means that it is then in the process of essentially at some point becoming law.
Yes, it is.
It's still a way away.
You still need time, and the government whips and the government will allocate time. They control essentially what gets debated when.
But there's a second part to this debate which we haven't touched on, is that we do have a problem in this country in that end-of-life care is awful. I mean,
and that's what Wes Streeting's point is.
There are lots of brilliant hospices which do wonderful work and have look after people at the end of their life in a wonderful way, but it is a patchwork, it is a postcode lottery, you're reliant on charities, it's simply not good enough in this country.
An ITV Tonight programme, I think, is it tonight that Daniel Hewitt has a special? Daniel Hewitt, fantastic investigative journalist.
We discussed on the programme yesterday.
Yes, yesterday.
I mean, the hospice movement problem is that they, at the moment, don't know whether they're going to get compensation for the rise in employers' national insurance. And Wes Streeting has said there will be an announcement before Christmas. But this is, this is a sector under huge financial pressure.
But I think if for whatever reason the bill doesn't go through, I don't believe it'll be talked out. But there could be some procedural impediment to it. I think again,
the likelihood is that it will not become law on this track.
I agree with you, but then the issue, all it will do is it will make people even more frustrated who want change.
Which is why I think the government's got to grip it.
And they will.
Do you think there will be any appetite in the government to say, OK, well, actually now this is such a big issue.
Yes.
This now needs to become a government-led piece of legislation.
Well, I mean, that's a very interesting question. I suspect that there will be some people in the government who are thinking, we've got a big agenda to be getting on with. We want to be building houses. We want to be reforming the rights that workers have in the workplace. We want to be reforming the NHS and schools. If this gets through, this isn't necessarily an argument against it. I'm just making the point. It will suck up a lot of the government's time and energy.
But we're here because Keir Starmer promised there would be the vote,
but,
with the suggestion he wanted the legislation. So
look, but I think,
say that and not deliver.
I think your route where the government gets behind this, I think, is unlikely, given the fact that cabinet ministers, prominent people, have spoken very openly against it. So all of a sudden, you're going to be asking half your cabinet essentially to push through a bill which they'd disagreed with
for something they've
weeks before. I think that's difficult.
Well, in that case, you're describing why this is a very, very difficult piece of legislation.
Yes, and it's interesting what you say there, Jonathan, about does the government want this issue to suck up all the airtime, essentially, for the next year or whatever, if they were to... And what Kemi Badenoch did yesterday was, I think, highlight, and she's on the front of the Daily Mail this morning, is highlight the fact that migration, actually, is the thing that people care about, as well as other things. What do we make, Kwasi, of your former colleague saying that the Tories made mistakes? Should we take a look at her clip? She had a press conference straight after PMQs yesterday to highlight this, because there are some migration figures coming out today.
She said that the Conservatives got it wrong. She criticised governments over successive parliaments, Labour and
many years.
Conservative. She said she wants to kind of look radically at the solution. She said there would be a cap on numbers, which, of course, is exactly what David Cameron said
it's a
when he became Prime Minister in 2010. And then she then says that failed. Is the cap the right approach for her to take at this stage in opposition?
Look, I think there are lots of reasons why she's had to come out and say, we got it wrong, we've got to be tougher. There's a lot of political unrest. If you look at the 14 years we're in government, this was always an issue. And it led, in some parts, to the Brexit vote. It led to the rise of UKIP and then reform. All of those issues.
By the way, we're not talking about...
didn't do a good job, is the truth.
And we're not talking about illegal migration,
we're talking about the numbers. And it was one of the... It was,
yeah.
over the last 14 years, and she's right to say this was an issue that dogged the Conservative government.
But it dogged the Labour government in the years before that.
And it did as well. And so I think as a new leader of the centre-right party, she has to address this issue. You've got 4 million people who voted reform in the last general election. If that goes up, her chances of becoming the next Prime Minister are much diminished. So she has to address this issue.
Yeah, and I was hearing yesterday that the membership numbers for Reform are sort of in the high 90,000s. And, I mean, they're chasing the tail of the membership numbers for the Conservative Party. I mean,
we can exaggerate that, but you're right. I mean,
But Kwasi, she has to worry about those Reform seats, those Reform votes. But she also... The Conservative Party lost loads and loads of constituencies.
They did.
To Liberal Democrats and with people moving over to Labour as well as the Lib Dems. Which way? I mean, her fundamental strategic question is she trying to move over to the Reform side of politics to win those voters back, or is she trying to get back to...
So my view on this, and David Cameron did a version of this, is you've got to do a two-step. In the way that in the old, before Trump, the old presidential election, you moved to secure your base in the primary, and then in the general election, you moved to the centre. And David Cameron did a version of that when he ran in 2005. He said, we're going to leave the EPP.
I know.
And at the time, everyone said that's a far-right position. But he stuck to it. He won the election. And then once he became leader of the opposition, he opened up the conversation about the environment, about the hugger hoodie, social inclusion, and the big society. So I think he did that very effectively. And she's got to do a version of that, I think.
And is she talking about the issue which will be the first or second most important election issue when we get to the general election?
And taking benefits away from migrants is one of her key ideas.
Well, I think the problem she's got is that Nigel Farage won't let her do that two-step because he can see what's coming. And that will be a problem for her. It'll be a problem for Tory MPs. Look, of course, immigration is always an issue at a general election. It's always one of the big issues alongside the state of the economy and the National Health Service. I think you'll actually see that the Labour government is making progress. They're not shouting about it a lot, but on the issue of illegal migration, for example, they are actually returning more people than perhaps gets talked about in the media.
Yes.
A lot of people are actually processing asylum claims, and the people whose asylum claims are not legitimate, they are actually being returned in bigger numbers than the previous government.
Why do you think they're not making a song and dance?
Well, I don't. I think there's actually a Home Office minister on the programme later, so maybe maybe she'll say something about it. But the government is making progress on this front.
And when we get the overall net migration numbers today, which will, we think, show that overall numbers have reduced somewhat. One of the key things that was brought in by the Conservative government was a capping of student numbers, which directly affects the universities, which has its own terrible knock-on effect.
Sure.
I mean, it is a balancing up, isn't it?
It's very difficult.
It's a numbers game on one end.
That's right.
But on the other side, you've got our universities who are saying we rely on international students, and they're not coming in now.
I remember there was a huge fight between George Osborne when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer and Theresa May when she was Home Secretary on exactly this point. Because Theresa May looked at the tens of thousands of figures and said, look, we've got to cap students. And of course, if you're in the Treasury or in BEIS or any of the other departments, education, you want to have the best foreign students.
And they often want to bring their families with them.
Well, that's very contentious as well.
Yes.
That's very contentious as well. So we've always had this tension between attracting really good people to come and study in the UK, open economy that we are, and the desire, the right desire, in my view, to control the level of increase of the population.
It's a big deal for the government.
Well, I mean, it certainly is, and the government has to deliver on this. But I think that, I think our viewers, want the best and the brightest to come and work in this country, to contribute to our economy, to work in our health and social care services. Frankly, our health and social care services would collapse.
But not on small boats, not illegal.
That's exactly right.
They don't want illegal migration, and they don't want chaos at our borders.
And the way I think Kemi has got something right is about the benefits, because a lot of people feel that it's all very well coming to the country if you're contributing, but the idea that you can come to the country and then on day one claim all the benefits and the social protection that everyone else does, that's something that's up for debate. And across Europe, people are talking about this.
Final quick one on this issue. Kemi Badenoch is sort of testing her muscles at PMQs now. This is her sort of big moment when she, can speak to the nation in a way. Is she right to describe Angela Rayner as a ginger nut? Honestly, is that what we're doing?
I mean, that's terrible. That is terrible. You see, the thing about...
And also hobnobbing. Is it the G20?
Look, I mean, you know what it's like, though? If you are in your preparations for your questions, we've all done this, questions, answer questions, somebody comes up with a good idea, you make up with a good idea, isn't this funny?
No, but your job is to stop that. Your job is to say,
actually,
no, that is no.
Do not say that. It's not funny. Try something else.
There's nothing, in the House of Commons, there's nothing like a good joke, and that was nothing like a good joke. I mean, you've got to... You're right. Look, the House of Commons is a weird environment. We've all been there, the dispatch box, and you do want to be sort of witty, and if you can be witty, it's the most wounding way to approach these things. But that wasn't witty.
Offensive, do you think?
I think it was. I think when people are talking about personal appearance.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
That's
and if it was the other way round,
exactly,
absolutely, quite rightly not.
I think it was an error of judgment.